Welcome, everyone, to Fantasy Foresight, the podcast. We're your hosts and co-founders of FantasyForesight.com, coming to you from the Rambo Fixture Company studios. I'm Ben.
And I'm Jay.
You ready to get rolling, Jay?
You know it. Let's do this.
All right, let's go. Welcome in, everyone. It is Sunday, April 26th. Fantasy Foresight, the podcast, is back, and for the first time ever, we are live. How you doing this morning, Jay?
Oh, Ben, you know I am great. It has been a long layoff since the 2019 season concluded. We've had plenty of time to either lick our wounds in some leagues or just enjoy that championship glow. But it is time to prepare, refocus, and get ready for the 2020 season. And we're back! And like every season, we always kick it up a notch. This year, live video. You get to see our pretty mugs every episode now. Isn't that great, Ben? Woo! I can't wait to get ready to go. However, before we do, in all seriousness, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention what all was going on in the world as we speak. COVID-19 has taken over, and during the off-season, Ben and I, the team at Fantasy Foresight, in partnership with our show sponsor, Rambo Fixture Company, created an initiative to try to help supply valuable and high-quality PPE to medical professionals who are helping fight this pandemic. And the response from you, our supporters, our audience, our friends on Twitter, has just been overwhelming. In all honesty, it's been impressive, and it has allowed us to purchase N95 masks and directly supply those to friends, family, co-workers, people that we know are in short supply of protective gear, and we've supplied them directly to those individuals. We have helped dozens of medical facilities. We've helped hundreds of people by supplying 1,000 N95 masks, and it's all thanks to you. And like I said, in a time when the world is absolutely crazy and we need the distraction of fantasy football, you have helped us do something and make a difference. So I wanted to start the show by saying a big thank you. It has been tremendous.
Totally seconded, Jay, and I got to give you personally a shout out because this was all started by you. You've led the way, set the example. We're all here at Team Foresight really proud of you, and we're happy to keep pushing. So if you haven't checked it out yet, go to FantasyForesight.com, check us out on Twitter, and you'll see all of the Fantasy Cares, Rambo Cares, pictures of where this stuff is landing, thank you responses, the whole 9 yards. So again, Jay, great job, and we appreciate all the healthcare frontline first responders out there now more than ever.
Absolutely.
But this is part of the reason that it's taken us a while to get back on the horse with all this, because there's been much more serious things going on. However, there's been a lot of fun stuff that has happened this offseason.
Oh man,
a lot of interesting draft picks in the first 3 rounds of the NFL draft in 2020 that are directly going to impact the fantasy landscape this upcoming season. So here's how this first episode is going to work coming back. We are going to go through A to Z, all 32 teams, and we have pinpoint what we believe to be every single fantasy relevant transaction and draft pick for the first 3 rounds. I'm going to go through. I'm going to tell Jay the transaction. He's going to tell me whether he thinks it's no big deal, if it's kind of a big deal, or definitely a big deal, and why. We're going to just go through the list A to Z. We've got about 65 things to cover, so we're going to try and make this as quick hitting as possible.
Here we go.
That's right. First up, we've got Arizona Cardinals. David Johnson, running back, out, re-signing Kenyon Drake. Jay, you got to be thinking this is definitely a big deal.
Oh, absolutely. With with David Johnson out and Kenyon Drake in, Kenyon Drake's got some impressive stats. And that is now his show in that backfield, and there's some value there for sure.
Absolutely. Even though he wasn't a Cardinal for half the season, he finished as PPR RB 17 overall,
Yeah,
RB 14 in fantasy points per game. And from week 9 on, he was the ninth most consistent performing running back in fantasy football.
that's what we're
So
talking about.
definitely a big deal. Definitely somebody to pay attention to as we move on through this offseason. Next up, the Arizona Cardinals still it says on my notes that they traded for DeAndre Hopkins, but as I recall, they stole for DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah,
Again,
they
you know,
absolutely did.
there's going to be plenty of times where I have to ask you if this is definitely a big deal, but again, I know this is definitely a big deal.
And outside of the running game for the Arizona Cardinals, that passing attack in fantasy land just wasn't relevant last year. They had an aging. Oh my god, I can't even think of his name. That's terrible.
We're talking Larry Fitzgerald.
Thank you, jeez Louise. Look at
I mean,
what
you didn't even
happens when
say
we go.
wide receiver.
Look what happens when we go live. They have an aging Larry Fitzgerald who was still maybe probably the only fantasy relevant wide receiver they had last year. They had a bunch of young guys who just couldn't establish themselves in a consistent manner. And now they bring in DeAndre Hopkins, the guy we know is quarterback proof. All right, he was able to produce with guys like David Savage behind center. So, this changes everything for that passing attack, and it also changes everything for that rushing attack. Now they've got a legit quarterback-proof threat downfield to open up defenses. Boy, this is really going to kick it up a notch for this offense this year in fantasy.
Absolutely. Even though it was supposedly a quote down year for DeAndre Hopkins last season, he was PPR wide receiver 5 overall, wide receiver 4 in fantasy points per game, and a top 3 or 4 guy as far as consistency goes. It's not like the Cards don't pass the ball. They were 9th in pass attempts last year. Plus, D Hop is out to have a revenge season. He is still an elite WR1. This season, once again, lock it up. Don't think twice about it.
Hey, things didn't end well for him in Houston. He's motivated to go out there and show Bill O'Brien who's boss. And you've already seen so far, live video, stumbling over my words. This is how it is, folks. Now you see how much editing Ben did on our previous episodes last year.
Yeah, hopefully that wasn't going to be too prevailing, but here we are.
Yeah.
So next up, we've got the Atlanta Falcons, who they released Devonta Freeman, signed Todd Gurley. Again, I know what your answer is, but it's definitely got to be it's a big deal.
It is a big deal. Look, Devonta Freeman was, a big time fantasy name over the past several seasons, and then they bring in Todd Gurley, a guy who really was highly debated last year. He had such an amazing 2018 season. 2019, we all weren't sure about what was going to happen, and that really unfolded. There was a lot of question marks about his usage, his durability in that knee. Now he goes home to Atlanta. Everybody wants him to come out and be this dominant force. The question is, can he be that dominant force? Can he still be that workhorse back with that knee? And that's a big question mark heading into the 2020 season. We all want to believe it's just going to be all about price point and risk going into 2020 with Todd Gurley.
Yeah, the number one reason I categorize this as definitely a big deal is because this is a 1-year prove-it deal. The Falcons have no reason not to get every touch they can from that $5.5 million contract. And if Todd Gurley is playing for another payday, either there or someplace else, that doesn't hurt either. Like you said, the only question is whether or not that knee can hold up for 16 weeks. So you've got to bake that into your price point of where you're willing to draft old TG3.
Absolutely.
Moving on. All right, Jay.
Oh,
is this
boy.
no big deal, kind of a big deal, or definitely a big deal? They traded a 2nd and a 5th rounder in exchange for Hayden Hurst, tight end, and a 4th rounder.
Listen, Hayden Hurst, good tight end, sure. That's a lot to give up for the tight end position, in my opinion. Again, good player, but boy, I mean, that's almost like DeAndre Hopkins returned from the Texans. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, I will classify this as kind of a big deal.
Hey, we're running into some tech issues. I lost your audio. And you're back.
Yay.
There we
Okay.
go.
Awesome. I hate you, tech difficulties. It's been our lives for the past month working from home
Right.
with all this nonsense.
Exactly.
Anyways, as I was saying, a couple years ago, the Baltimore Ravens drafted tight end Hayden Hurst in the first round, and they do not make it a habit of jettisoning their first round picks anytime soon
That's
after they
true.
draft. So, they definitely had a high level of value placed in Hayden Hurst coming into the league. And I think the fact that the Falcons paid so much indicates that they do as well. And remember, Austin Hooper saw
Yeah.
97 targets in just 13 games last season. So, in my opinion, this could be a sneaky back end tight end one with upside heading into the season.
Absolutely. Like you said, missing Austin Hooper, they had to do something. They went, instead of drafting an unknown quantity, they went after a high-end known quantity in Hayden Hurst. The talent is there. The offense is there. So, yeah, you're right. Absolutely. Nice back end, even middle of the road, tight end one in 2020.
Yep. All right, next up, no big deal, kind of a big deal, or definitely a big deal. The Baltimore Ravens drafted Ohio State running back J.K. Dobbins, 55 overall in the second round.
Big deal, my friend. You know we love that rushing attack. The only hesitancy has been their trend of going running back by committee. They do like to use everybody in their arsenal, spread the wealth a little bit, but boy, J.K. Dobbins really could not have gone to a better landing spot. That rushing attack is always fantastic, especially in fantasy. So, landing spot is great. Now, it might take him a little time to step in and really become the lead back there, but the path is laid for him. So, big deal. They've got their heir apparent in Baltimore.
Well, you bring up a good point with Mark Ingram, and for that reason, specifically through the lens of the 2020 season outlook, I am going to categorize this as kind of a big deal because even though you've got Lamar Jackson as your quarterback in that offense, that part is a big deal. The question mark comes in with a healthy Mark Ingram. He's the only thing preventing this, in my opinion, from being the most intriguing running back landing spot in this season's NFL draft.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of comments so far about Mark Ingram. A lot of people give him the credit of being that type of, Frank Gore Iron Man. He's going to play well into his mid-30s and just continue to slowly produce season after season. So how do you take that guy off the field? Will he ever get off the field? And that could pose an issue for JK of really taking over, but you can also look at the situation in Philadelphia last year, where they had Jordan Howard, a proven known commodity. They draft Miles Sanders, and it takes a few weeks to get him ingrained into that offense. But as the season gets rolling, more carries are given to the young guy, and when they get towards the latter stages of the season, really the young guy begins to take over as the lead back in that offense, and I really hope that that's the case for JK, but you're right, that is a major question mark heading into the 2020 season, and will have to be baked into his price point.
I love it. We got a lot of things to cover. Me and you need to pick it up a little bit.
All right, let's go. Let's go.
Our audience is going to be here for 2 hours.
Let's go.
The Baltimore Ravens, also in the third round, 92 overall, drafted Texas wide receiver Devin Duvernay. So, Jay, is that no big deal, kind of a big deal, or definitely a big deal?
I have no idea. I'm going to say...
Let me... All right, if you have no idea, I have studied up on Mr. Duvernay. I'm going to say this is currently no big deal.
All right, I'm with you.
All right, in Dane Brugler's 2020 draft guide, he was his rookie WR21. And despite Lamar's amazing season last year, his best wide receiver in fantasy was Marquise Brown. He had less than 600 yards in 14 games and finished as PPR wide receiver 46. So for all of Lamar Jackson's dominance, thus far, it has not yet translated into fantasy relevancy for his wide receivers. So at this point, I'm probably going to wait and see on.
Well, and that's exactly it, Ben. A third-round receiver going to a passing attack that I really don't have a lot of faith in yet in fantasy land, and that's why not a big deal.
Right. Well, you can definitely elaborate on this one a little bit
All
because
right.
next up we've got the Buffalo Bills, who earlier this season
Wow.
traded for Stephon Diggs.
Yeah, I love my boy Diggs. That Buffalo passing attack can be pretty good, but you're asking me to really dive in and probably pay a decent price for Mr. Diggs with Josh Allen behind center, and I just don't know if I can trust that arm with a high-end pick in that offense as much as I love Stephon.
Well,
Oh boy.
we'll see if this changes your
Oh
mind. I say
boy.
this is definitely a big
All
deal.
right.
Listen to this. In 2019, the Minnesota Vikings ranked 24th in
Yeah.
pass attempts, while Buffalo ranked
Right.
6th in pass attempts.
Okay.
So in that extremely low volume offense, Diggs still went 67 catches for 1,160 yards, 6 touchdowns, and check this out, with a 17.9 yards per reception average. So when you combine the uptick in passing volume with Josh Allen's cannon of a deep ball, there could be some fireworks in Buffalo.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I love the volume. It's just the accuracy that worries me. But you're right. With any increase in volume, you would think Diggs would be a lock for 1,200 yards this season.
And we're not talking about a couple of slots. The difference between being the 24th pass
Oh,
heaviest
you're
team in the
right.
league and the 6th is huge. So
Absolutely.
there's just going to be a ton more opportunity. He is the unquestioned wide receiver one, unlike the power struggle him and Adam Thielen always seem to kind of have in Minnesota. So I don't know. If he can stay healthy,
I'll tell
the
you what,
path is
man.
laid for Stephon Diggs this season.
I will tell you what. No Tom Brady in New England. Big question mark there. Buffalo's defense loaded. Now they're addressing offense and putting weapons and protection around Josh Allen. Watch out for Buffalo this season.
Yeah, man. All right. Still with Buffalo. Is this no big deal, kind of a big deal, or definitely a big deal? They draft Utah running back Zach Moss, 86 overall in the 3rd round.
Yeah, high draft pick. Yeah, I love my boy Singletary, but he did have some durability issues during his rookie campaign, so probably smart to bring in another young guy to help split some carries. Makes me worry a little bit about Singletary's usage. I still like him. I still like the potential of Moss, but yeah, I mean, kind of a big deal for both of those guys.
That's exactly how I categorize it. Kind of a big deal because I was one of those that was excited about Singletary's upside heading into the season. But with this pick, you got to say not so fast. Over the last 3 seasons, Zach Moss rushed for nearly 3,700 yards, 36 rush TDs, and an average of 5.87 yards per carry. He's going to step right into that Frank Gore role, and it's still going to be a running back by committee. The more and more you look around this league, the more and more it seems like that's the preferred strategy at the running back position.
Yep.
So, I was one of those who was thinking, okay, I'm going to watch what the Bills do in the draft, and if they don't address that running back position and Frank Gore's out, it could mean a nice improved usage or production out of Singletary. But now with this draft pick, I do not know.
Yep. Who we got next?
Next up, we've got the Carolina Panthers. These are a couple I won't give it away. But no big deal, kind of a big deal, or definitely a big deal for fantasy football in 2020 that the Carolina Panthers signed quarterback Teddy Bridgewater.
I mean, obviously a big deal. No Cam Newton. He's going to be the man now in Carolina. So it's just a matter of can he step in and become the Teddy Bridgewater that we saw before he went down with injury in Minnesota? He's got a great core of receivers. We all know he's got the best fantasy running back in the league, so the weapons are around him. Can he himself be fantasy relevant? And yeah, I mean, I think there's a good chance of him being a back-end QB1. Kind of a big deal.
I like when we disagree.
All right, let's do it.
No big deal. I think this is no big deal at all. I like Teddy Bridgewater, especially the leader, the person, the real football player. But I'll be honest, I'll be surprised if he's fantasy relevant this season. Everything that I've ever seen about his game to me tells me that he is a winner. He grinds out games and does whatever's needed to win. He never seems to put up a ton of fantasy numbers. So I'll believe it when I see it type of deal. And so for right now, I'm going to say this is no big deal.
Well, that's concerning then because he's got the weapons around him to be successful in the NFL. There are a lot of quarterbacks that do more with less. So if he fails to live up to being fantasy relevant, that would be very disappointing, not only for himself, but also for that team, because there's really no excuse with the weapons that he has in that offense.
Yeah, it's just that organization seems to be completely shifting its direction. So I just, whenever you're talking about that level of big change, I just don't know what to expect. So that's
Yeah.
just going to make me shy away a
All
little bit.
right. I like it.
All right. Before we leave the Carolina Panthers, is it no big deal, kind of a big deal, or definitely a big deal that they signed wide receiver Robbie Anderson this offseason?
I think that's kind of a big deal, especially for the other receivers in that offense, and I can't in my mind decide if it's good or bad. You're adding a talented Robbie Anderson to that team. You just talked about your hesitancy about their quarterback, which makes you nervous for all their receivers if that passing attack isn't going to be dialed in. That would make me concerned for all of their fantasy relevancy. But you add a Robbie Anderson in to give them one more weapon, one more guy for defenses to worry about, in addition to CMC. The other receivers in that offense, does this give them the opportunity to get free more? Or does this just make one more mouth to feed?
This is why I love these discussions, because you just get such varying perspectives. Because once again, I got to disagree with you. I think this is no big deal because, oddly enough, each of the last two seasons, Robbie Anderson has finished on the nose as PPR wide receiver 39. He is a best ball, boom bust kind of guy. And I
Yeah.
just don't see that changing with his move to this team.
Yeah, he was in a Jets offense. Come on, Ben. It's not like we're talking about a high-flying offense here with a ton of weapons. And he does have some durability issues. He's gotten nicked
Agreed.
up and missed games, so there is a concern there. But, with the guys he's got around him now, like I said before when we were talking about Teddy Bridgewater, there's no excuse not to produce now. They've got all the talent they need on that offense. I just can't come up with if I think all that talent is going to make it more difficult for him to get the necessary targets and production to be fantasy relevant and to be better than he's been as with the Jets, or if this gives him so much freedom to operate now. He's a talented receiver. And like you said, he's got that potential to boom. Can he do it with consistency now that he's in Carolina?
See, I've got a hypothesis that I'll be chasing before we enter our preview pod season, but I really want to take a little bit more of a deeper look into how the fantasy running backs performed on teams while Teddy Bridgewater was a starting quarterback.
Interesting.
I really feel like just my gut instinct is that I recall that when Teddy Bridgewater starts, regardless of the team, it's a very run-heavy offense. It's a smart game plan. It's an efficient game plan, but it's one where they kind of pass by necessity where they need to get what they need versus like that's their primary method of attack. So I just think I do recall seeing numbers that his yards per attempt and yards per completion were lower than average last season. To me, that just spells dumping off the CMC all day, and that aligns with if you follow the money, that aligns with the contract extension that they rightfully gave CMC this offseason. So for me, I think it's going to be more of the same CMC show as far as like what you can count on from a fantasy production standpoint, week in and week out.
I get it. All right, who's up next?
Moving on, we've got the Chicago Bears. Is it no big deal, kind of a big deal, or definitely a big deal that they, one, signed Jimmy Graham to a 2-year, signed tight end Jimmy Graham to a 2-year, $18 million contract this offseason, two, drafted Notre Dame tight end Cole Kmet at the top of the second round, 43 overall, release Trey Burton, and yet somehow they still have 10 tight ends on their roster, Jay. I can't make this up.
I am so thankful for the Bears because they take the focus away from the poor draft from my Philadelphia Eagles. So thank you, Chicago. I don't even know what to make of this, Ben. I want to say it's no big deal because they're adding a rookie tight end to a tight end room that is busting at the seams. Like, they can't fit anymore. And they had so many other areas of need to address, and yet they go tight end in the first round. What? Like, there's no way that he's, in my opinion, there's fantasy relevancy there, especially in year one.
To me right now, it's no big deal. I feel like at this stage of his career, Jimmy Graham in this offense, his ceiling is nothing more than streamer worthy at best in 20.
We've talked enough about it.
Indeed. Rounding out the Chicago Bears offseason from a fantasy relevancy perspective, is it no big deal, kind of a big deal, or definitely a big deal that they traded for quarterback Nick Foles?
Big deal. I mean, we know what we have in Mitch Trubisky now. Has he had some good games? Yes. Has he been consistently good? Heck no. So now they bring in Big Nick Foles, Super Bowl MVP, Super Bowl champ. You know that he's going to push for that starting job and see if he can recapture that magic. So the heat is on in Chicago. It's a two-man race. I know who I'm putting my money on. But yeah, I mean, that's a pretty big deal going through a major quarterback change for that team.
I agree with everything you said except your categorization of it, because
Okay.
from a fantasy perspective, I say it's no big deal,
Right.
because whether it's Nick Foles or Mitch Trubisky, I'll believe it when I see it from a fantasy perspective for either one of those guys.
Yeah, and the guys who produce with Mitch Trubisky on the field can certainly produce with Nick Foles on the field. So I'm not worried about the receivers' production or anything like that. If they can do it with Mitch, they can do it with Nick.
Absolutely. Next up, this team, much to my Cleveland Browns fandom chagrin, the Cincinnati Bengals have had quite an
Yes,
offseason.
they have.
Is it no big deal, kind of a big deal, or definitely a big deal that they drafted number one overall LSU quarterback Joe
Yeah,
Burrows?
definitely a big deal. I think there's no doubt that, one, they got their franchise quarterback for a long time. Now, the variable in this is off-season program, off-season workouts with everything that's going on. Can he get up to speed? Can he get ingrained in that offense? Can the Bengals trade Andy Dalton when physicals can't be done? Is that going to delay the process enough to where they're going to have to keep Andy Dalton on the roster to start the 2020 campaign and maybe start the season with him and bring in Joe Burrow as the season gets rolling along? There are a lot of variables and a lot of question marks just with the way the world is right now. Let's hope we have football, period, but I wonder if this delays things enough to where the Bengals have to roll with Andy Dalton initially and bring Joe Burrow in. But big deal, man, because I think there was a clear separation between Joe Burrow this year and every other quarterback taken.
Agreed. It's definitely a big deal. And like I said, as a Browns fan, this Bengals offense is shaping up a lot better and a lot
Yeah.
quicker than I'd like.
Yeah.
I hear your point about, the unusual circumstances that we're in and how that might impact Joe. But I've got a sneaky suspicion that man has been all in the Bengals playbook for a couple of months now.
Yeah,
I'm just going to go out on a limb and guess that.
Right.
I know it would never, no NFL player would ever break any little rule in the NFL. No team would either. So,
No, but smart.
Anyways.
Look, he's a smart guy. He's a talented guy. He's a number one overall pick. So if he's the starter day one, would that surprise me? Absolutely not. The only way he's not is because of everything else that's going on right now playing a factor.
I think Cincinnati has been smart not to rush the trading of Andy Dalton, because as we get closer to the season, as you get a quarterback injury here or there around the league, Andy Dalton's value all of a sudden spikes. So,
Yep.
I do not expect Andy Dalton to be on this roster by the time that we kick off the 2020 season, whenever that is. I expect this to be Joe Burrow's team from day one. I mean, it blew my mind to really dive into this guy from an analytical perspective. I've never seen anything like his accuracy last year. Remember that he had the combination of 527 pass attempts, 76% accuracy, and at a rate of 14 plus yards per completion.
Okay.
That is insane. That's insane.
If we are going to dive into this, a lot has been made about his pocket presence. And if you go back and you watch his highlights, really when the pocket breaks down and he has to move out of the pocket to make a play, his downfield vision is something that you don't see every day. You see a lot of quarterbacks going for the short or intermediate route, looking for the safety net along the sidelines. Joe Burrow always has his eyes downfield, and he's always been in sync with his receivers, and they will break, and he will hit them in stride down the field for big plays. And that speaks volumes to what we may see in Cincinnati. Like I said, his downfield vision and his pocket presence is everything, and it's what really separates him from being just very good to being potentially great. And that's the difference between him and Andy Dalton.
Removing myself from the Cleveland Browns perspective, it's going to be really, really fun to watch what happens in Cincinnati from a
Yeah.
fantasy football perspective this season. That leads us right into
Yes.
the next transaction for Cincinnati. Is it no big deal, kind of a big deal, or definitely a big deal that they added Clemson wide receiver T. Higgins at 33 overall in the second round?
Big deal. I mean they're adding a very good receiver, a dangerous receiver to an already solid receiving core. Getting AJ Green back, Tyler Boyd, and now T. Higgins. That's a nice little group of receivers there to go on the attack with. From a fantasy perspective, what do I make of AJ Green now at this point in his career after what we've seen durability wise? We know Tyler Boyd can produce. We've seen that in AJ Green's absence and even when he's been on the field. But now you add in a sneaky play like T. Higgins, and some nice weapons there on offense for Mr. Burrow.
Yeah, I'm going to call this kind of a big
Yeah,
deal.
yeah.
Like you said, there's a lot of question marks in that receiving core right now because you've got AJ Green, Tyler Boyd, and John Ross, all of which that you have seen just dominate at times. I know John Ross has been very injury prone, but Jay, at the start of the season, his production was undeniable.
You're right. You're right.
So I'm going to give the caveat that when healthy, I hypothesize that currently T. Higgins is fourth on this depth chart behind AJ Green, Tyler Boyd, and John Ross. So at least early on, I don't know how much he's going to be utilized. If we get to see training camp reports and things of that nature, obviously that's going to help us along the way. But right now, I don't know that he's anything more than the wide receiver 4 on that.
No, you're right. Absolutely. And like you said, really what we're going to be watching for is who Joe Burrow establishes that rapport with on the field, because whoever that is, that's who you go all in on. It's just going to be difficult to do that prior to the start of the season.
All right. Moving on, up next, we've got one move from my Cleveland Browns from a fantasy perspective this offseason. They signed tight end Austin Hooper. No big deal, kind of a big deal, or definitely a big deal?
I want to say somewhere between kind of a big deal and definitely a big deal. We saw Austin Hooper ball out for Atlanta last year and really be the consistent tight end that you need in fantasy. And now he's going to a Cleveland offense that really didn't live up to all the hype in 2019, but part of that wasn't due to a little bit of the case of the dropsies from their tight end core last year. So now you're adding in a bit more of a consistent receiver in Austin Hooper into that offense, and some of those drops don't occur, and that only helps Baker, that offense, move the ball, and Austin Hooper. I really like Austin Hooper heading into 2020, and I'd be very worried if I was anybody else in that tight end group.
Well, this answer is going to kind of surprise you because I've got this somewhere between no big deal and kind of a big deal.
Okay, all right.
As you all know, I love the Browns, and if you listen to this podcast, you know I love Austin Hooper. However, from specifically a 2020 fantasy perspective, I expect the Browns to run it a ton, to feed Landry and Beckham, and still carve out a role for David Njoku. He will have some nice weeks, but I don't see him being dependable week in and week out like he was last year as the guy at the tight end position for the Falcons.
All right, I get that.
It's an interesting discussion.
Yeah.
And, it's a moving target. Things change daily. As the variables change, so does the equation. So we will keep an eye on it. And for now, we'll agree to disagree on that. Moving on from the yacht. Dallas Cowboys, Jared Jones.
Boy.
Is it no big deal, kind of a big deal, or definitely a big deal that 17 overall in the first round, they added wide receiver CeeDee Lamb to that receiving core?
Huge deal, and I owe an apology to Jerry Jones. We were all cracking jokes that Jerry was gonna have no accountability as he was drafting by himself in his basement or his RV or whatever it was. But you know what? He really did a bang-up job in the draft. They really had a fantastic draft overall, getting great value almost at every single pick. And boy, adding CeeDee Lamb, the danger of his speed and ability in that offense, pairing him with Michael Gallup, the apparently unknown WR2 in that offense who went for 1,200 yards in his second season. Oh, boy. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, we got to keep it quiet about Michael Gallup, but I agree. This is definitely a big deal. He was Dane Brugler's rookie WR1 in his draft guide this year. He joins that potent wide receiving core. He can definitely play the slot, and that's just where he might end up terrorizing the NFC East for years to come.
I'll tell you what, spoiler alert, I think Michael Gallup's my WR1 in that offense, and CeeDee Lamb might be my WR2 in that offense.
You know what? Amari Cooper's so up and down. If we could go between now and the start of the fantasy football season and that nobody else mentions Michael Gallup, I would be very happy. Because I'm expecting big things from him this
year.
For sure. Moving on, a team that has had a complete fantasy football makeover this offseason. The Denver Broncos, man, they are coming hard. They're not messing around, and they are getting a lot of attention around the NFL. So, first up, no big deal, kind of a big deal, definitely a big deal that they signed running back Melvin Gordon.
I'll tell you what, I mean, that's a pretty big deal. That is not only for the team, but for that running back room. You know, we had a pretty decent duo in that backfield, but now you're throwing Melvin Gordon into it. You know he's going to get the rock. So what does that do to our boy Royce Freeman? I mean, you would think he's going to get buried now on the depth chart unless they're going to use him for the traditional power running game and use then Melvin Gordon as the change of pace pass catching back in that offense. So really, you would have to think Melvin Gordon is the guy in that backfield, and it bumps everybody else down. Sorry, Phillip Lindsay. The run was great. You had one heck of a breakout, but it seems like reality has now set in with a top-tier running back in that offense.
Absolutely. It's totally a big deal. If you follow the money, they're definitely planning on making Melvin Gordon the guy. He remains a rock-solid fantasy RB1. Like you said, it'll be very interesting to see what they do with Lindsay and or Royce.
Yep.
So moving on to the next transaction for the Denver Broncos, they drafted a pair of wide receivers in the first and second round, and we'll just kind of lump them together. In the first, they went Alabama wide receiver Jerry Jeudy. In the second, they went Penn State wide receiver KJ Hamler. So what do you think, Jay? No big deal, kind of a big deal, or definitely a big deal?
No, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. Jerry Jeudy, arguably the best receiver in this class, if not in that top group. Definitely in that top group, arguably number one. So they are getting a bona fide day one starter. That's going to significantly impact the rest of that receiving core. It's going to bump everybody down a notch. You know, those were guys we were grasping at straws for, hoping for fantasy relevancy last year. I'm not sure the consistency, the high-end consistency in any of those receivers really warranted them. So Jerry Jeudy, should be the targeted asset in that offense now in the receiving core. Hamler is a fine receiver. That's kind of probably not, somewhere between not a big deal and kind of a big deal for me. He'll figure in with the rest of that group and have to carve out his niche.
I agree. I think Jerry Jeudy is definitely a big deal. Hamler's kind of a big deal. Jerry Jeudy ran a 4.27 40. He's got Cortland Sutton on the other side across the field. In 3 years at Alabama, he averaged nearly 18 yards per reception.
Yeah.
And for KJ Hamler, all I've heard is how fast of a slot receiver he is. With a second-year quarterback in Drew Lock, he could be heavily utilized immediately.
Yep. Going to be interesting.
All right, moving on. Yes, sir. We got the Detroit Lions, who, no big deal, kind of a big deal, or definitely a big deal, drafted running back from Georgia, DeAndre Swift, at 35 overall in the second round.
Kind of a big deal, man. For Kerryon Johnson, I say kind of a big deal because I feel like Detroit was a team that had other needs. They replaced a corner with their first round pick, so they didn't really get better as a team with their first round. And then in the second round, they take a running back, and that's not really a position of need for them. But boy, in a fantasy world, it does have an impact on our boy Kerryon Johnson. I know Kerryon has been debated in the fantasy world. He's got a little bit of a durability issue now, but,
But so does DeAndre Swift.
Wow, you're
I
right.
mean, so this is what I'm
Man.
saying. It's kind of a big deal. He was Brugler's rookie RB2 this season.
Yeah.
And like Carry On, he's dealt with nagging injuries in college and has missed some time. So right now, I honestly don't know what the Lions were thinking with that pick.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you've got an ouchie RBBC in that
Yeah.
backfield in Detroit.
Yeah.
And I'm not overpaying for either guy. If I need a running back and one of the two fall to me and there's no better options, okay.
Take a
Outside
chance.
of that, I am not trying to target that backfield.
I'm with you, man, and I just for Lions fans, I just don't feel like they got better as a team through the first 2 rounds, and those are spots where you really need to.
Right. Moving on to the Green Bay Packers. Oh my God. Is it no big deal, kind of a big deal, or definitely a big deal that in the first round at 26 overall, they drafted Utah State quarterback Jordan Love?
Look, I'm not even a Packers fan. I'm not even a huge Aaron Rodgers fan. What? Like, you've got A-Rod tied up. Big contract. If you're not going to play a rookie quarterback that you drafted during his rookie contract, what is the point? Green Bay and Philly, if he doesn't play in the next 3 years, what is the point?
Right.
You have so many other needs.
Agreed. And from a fantasy perspective, it's no big deal. This isn't relevant. From a big picture perspective, it is. But this definitely proves 2 things from the Packers. Number 1, they hate Aaron Rodgers. Number 2, the concept of providing him with pass catching help is apparently something that they are totally averse to. I don't understand it. They're behaving as if they do not want A-Rod. Because if you want A-Rod and you're embracing him, the guy that you've paid and extended and won you a Super Bowl, then you try to surround him with as many weapons and support as possible. And it's just not happening in Green Bay, and it's fascinating.
Dude, all right, let me go off for just a quick second. There was a rift between him and Mike McCarthy. The ownership of that team decided to side with Aaron Rodgers and jettison Mike McCarthy. If you really dislike your quarterback that much, then why do that? Why do that and then turn around and then you got thrashed by the San Francisco 49ers rushing game in the playoffs last year. You were 1 game from the Super Bowl and you got obliterated because you couldn't stop the run, and you turn around and do nothing to address it this offseason. Instead, you waste a first-round pick. I'm sorry. Jordan Love might be a fine quarterback someday. In my opinion, probably more of a nice career backup quarterback in the NFL. And you do it, what? Just to send a message to Aaron Rodgers? What? You did not improve your team. And you were so close to playing for a Super Bowl. What? It just makes no sense, man. It makes no sense.
I agree. And there are 2 more quick things to discuss with the Green Bay. I'm just going to quickly touch on them so we can move on for the sake of time.
Yep.
In the second round, 62 overall, they drafted Boston College running back A.J. Dillon. I think this is kind of big deal only because this could limit some of Aaron Jones' upside. He could vulture some touches, some goal line looks, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I don't expect him to have like standalone value in 2020.
Yep.
And then in the third round, 94 overall, they drafted Cincinnati tight end Josiah DeGara. I don't know if he's going to be fantasy relevant in 2020 at this point. Maybe Mercedes Lewis has the best shot on that team to be streamer worthy at the tight end position, but I don't know. Right now, I don't trust the cohesion and all the vibes over there in Green Bay, so I'm definitely staying away from that tight end.
No, especially the tight end position. I just don't know if the volume and consistency is going to be there for me to be able to rely on that during the fantasy season.
Right. Next up, we've got the Houston Texans, man. They trade DeAndre Hopkins, and then they trade for Brandon Cooks and David Johnson DJ. I mean, I definitely think this is a big deal, and I honestly don't know how, 1, Bill O'Brien still has a job, and 2, if Brandon Cooks has anything left in the tank. He's been a favorite on this pod, but man, he's endured a lot of concussions at this point in his career. He didn't even play all that well when he was able to suit up last season. I just don't know what they're thinking in Houston with this one.
I mean, they paid a steep price for him, so I hope they know what they're doing. And look, you and I both love Brandon Cooks on this podcast. And outside of the concussions, he's been a very reliable Iron Man type receiver. But yeah, I mean, the concussions are worrisome. I hope he has something left in the tank. But like you said, in fantasy land, I'm just going to have to kind of take more of a wait and see approach. It's a nice ad for the Texans after they gave away DeAndre Hopkins, but boy,
Yeah.
what is going on in Houston?
I don't know. I mean, David Johnson has a chance to be very fantasy relevant because you got to believe that Bill O'Brien has a very high opinion of David Johnson because it's part of the only way that you can really justify that move at all. And so, you've got Carlos Hyde and Duke Johnson in that
right,
backfield,
right.
but now it definitely seems like they're going to try to use David Johnson as the guy, which could definitely end up translating into some RB1 type value.
Yeah, like you said, two guys that really have big question marks about whether they still have it entering this season. And David Johnson, I know, is motivated to go out and prove that he has some left in the tank. And that Houston Texans rushing attack has been productive, even though really it's been kind of ho-hum on the names back there. Lamar Miller was quietly productive for a couple of seasons. So if anybody can do it, David Johnson certainly can. So we shall see.
Absolutely. Next up, we've got the Indianapolis Colts. They got a couple of transactions here as well. Obviously, it's no big deal, kind of a big deal, or definitely a big deal that they signed quarterback Phillip Rivers this offseason.
Big deal. I mean, he's obviously going to be the starter for that team now. So we'll see if he can sling it around in that Indianapolis offense. So fantasy-wise, Phillip's always been a sneaky play, kind of that back-end QB1 consistency-wise. So we'll see. I mean, he's got some weapons, some young weapons in that offense, and we'll see if he can take them to the next level.
I don't know, man. I dug into this a little bit. I'm going to disagree with you.
All right.
It's kind of this is no big deal at all.
Okay, all right.
Fantasy-wise, with arguably better weapons last season, he was only usable 6 times in all of 2019. And I just don't see how that changes at this stage in his career.
Yeah.
In what is pretty clearly a downgrade going from his Chargers weapons to what he now has to work with in Indy. So, I don't feel any buzz around this move, and I just think if anybody does, it's a little bit of fool's gold, and I'm probably going to stay away.
I can see that. It does certainly seem like there is not much buzz around it. It's like, who can we get? All right, we'll go get him, see if he can do something.
I mean, I don't know if all said and done, by the time all is said and done, if they're not going to kind of regret that and wish they would have just stuck with Jacoby. I think he had a little bit of an underrated season. I know he kind of tailed off down the stretch last year, but he was pretty serviceable for that team.
I agree.
So we'll see what happens.
What else did they do?
They signed tight end Trey Burton, where it's no big deal. With
moving on,
gone, I'll be shocked if Doyle isn't a rock solid tight end one this season.
Yep, moving on.
What is, in my opinion, kind of a big deal is that they drafted wide receiver Michael Pittman at the top of the second at 34 overall.
Yes, kind of a big deal. I would imagine that he's going to factor in. We'll see what this does now to Paris Campbell. And, I don't think he's going to threaten T.Y., obviously, but I think he's going to factor into that offense. So maybe he is now the new number 2, and Paris Campbell can be that nice slot receiver, and maybe this is a nice piece to add to that offense. But like you said, now you've got a second-year receiver and a rookie receiver in that offense, and it's going to be tough for Phillip Rivers to really take it to the next level and lead this team to the promised land with a lot of inexperience around him.
Yeah, I can see him developing potentially into a flex-worthy play this season. He was Brugler's wide receiver 9 overall. He was quoted as saying, overall, Pittman is a strong-framed pass catcher, and although he only has average speed by NFL standards, he wins with physicality and focus at the catch point, projecting as a reliable possession target at all 3 levels in the NFL, end quote. They don't have many legit pass catchers in Indy. So like I said, I definitely, when he's described that specific way, I definitely feel like a true possession type of receiver could be utilized by Phillip Rivers in 2020.
Yep.
Biggest move that they made, definitely a big deal. They traded up from 44 to 41 to snag in the second round Wisconsin running back Jonathan Taylor.
Yep. Man, definitely a big deal. The talent is there, and it's a big deal for Marlon Mack and the rest of that running back room. Those were guys who, when healthy, produced. It's just the when healthy was the big question mark. And Ben, look, I don't want to make too much of this. Jonathan Taylor, in my mind, coming out of college, just I'm not very excited about him, but I felt the same way about Christian McCaffrey. So I'm waiting to reserve judgment till I see what he can actually do at the next level. I have my question marks, but I've been proven wrong before in a big way. So we'll see. I mean, I think he's going to get snaps. He's going to get the opportunity. They wouldn't have taken him if they believed Marlon Mack was their every down back and a guy who they can trust to be there. So yeah, I mean, kind of a big deal. Definitely a big deal. It's just going to be how much of a split workload does each guy get heading into the season. And right now, I'd rather go with the healthier guy in Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a lot of college tread on his tires, but he is a stud. It's definitely a big deal because unlike Marlon Mack, uh, Jonathan Taylor has not missed a start in the last 3 seasons.
Right.
He finished his 3 years at Wisconsin with over 6,100 rushing yards at a 6.7 yards per carry average with 50 rushing touchdowns. The end is near for Marlon Mack in Indianapolis.
Boy, it's such a quick, yeah, man.
Done.
Yeah.
Moving on. Jacksonville Jaguars signed tight end Tyler Eifert, 2 years, $9.5 million. This is no big deal. My expectations for him as a potential streamer at best. Not sure how much he has left physically at this point. He's battled through a ton of injuries, and he's got Gardner Minshew throwing him the ball, so we'll see about that. Similarly, they drafted the Jaguars at 42 overall in the second round. Colorado wide receiver Laviska Shenault Jr. He's
good
talented.
job.
Thanks. He's talented, but he's inexperienced, unpolished, and he is on this Jacksonville offense. So for all those reasons, I do not think that either one of those are going to be particularly fantasy relevant this offseason. I breezed through those because we're going to take a little bit of time on this next one, I'm sure.
Okay.
Kansas City drafted LSU running back Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 32 overall in the first round. No big deal. It's a big deal. Jay, tell me why.
It's a big deal. Listen, with that Kansas City running attack, we all knew that the running backs they had really weren't huge studs, but yet they've always produced fantasy-wise, and you know that Andy Reid offense is going to be productive in the running game. So the fact that they went this direction with the last pick of the first round made waves in the fantasy world. He is now going to be in that top group of running backs drafted in drafts this fall. I mean, he is going to be a much targeted, maybe the most targeted rookie running back in fantasy drafts.
And in that offense, by the way.
Yes.
So I trust Andy Reid implicitly. So in Brugler's draft guide, he was running back 4. Andy Reid disagrees and thought he was running back 1. I'm going to respectfully defer to Coach Andy Reid.
Sure.
However, Brugler still liked him. He was quoted as saying he is, quote, productive with the ball in his hands due to his blend of agility, power, and toughness.
Exactly.
Projecting as an any down player who can line up across the formation, end quote.
Well,
that sounds like a high-powered toy for Patty Mahomes to just.
And that's what Andy Reid wants. He wants somebody who can not only run the ball when needed to between the tackles, but also catch out of the backfield. Look at Kareem Hunt and what he was able to do in that Andy Reid offense. And I'm sure Andy Reid sees this as more of a Kareem Hunt replacement. A single guy he can utilize in every package. Doesn't matter what down it is or what they're going to do. This guy is going to be involved, and that's why he's going to be the most targeted rookie running back in drafts this season, and probably a top 6 running back overall in drafts.
Absolutely. Another team who's made a lot of noise that it may come out of nowhere from a fantasy perspective this season. Las Vegas Raiders, baby.
I'll tell you what.
Let's go through a couple of the snoozer transactions that they had, and then we'll talk about some of the interesting ones. Some of the no big deal stuff they've done this offseason. They signed quarterback Marcus Mariota. Carr could potentially thrive now that he has all these weapons, so keeping Mariota on the bench shouldn't be hard. They also signed wide receiver Nelson Aguilar after their draft of all these wide receivers. I don't know how much playing time Aguilar will get unless he's totally improved those hands, which I doubt. So then, let's see. Then they went ahead and they drafted 3 wide receivers, Jay.
Yeah.
They drafted Alabama wide receiver Henry Ruggs at 12 overall in the first. They drafted quarterback, wide receiver combo Lynn Bowden Jr. in the third at 80 overall from Kentucky. And then they drafted South Carolina wide receiver Brian Edwards at 81 overall in the third round. So, what do you think of the new wide receiving core that Derek Carr has to work
I'll
with?
tell you what, it's Ruggs for me, man. He's a guy who I was high on entering this season. To see him go to Oakland where they needed a speedster. Look, they targeted speed this offseason. That is clear. Which is funny to me because that's something Al Davis always went after. And that tradition has carried on. They went for nothing but speed. Ruggs is a burner, a game breaker, great hands, and I love the pick. And he's somebody who I'm going to be targeting in my drafts as a great WR3 flex play. You know, he is a rookie. It's going to take some time for him to really become a pro's pro. But, boy, the upside is there for him in that offense. I love it.
Without a doubt. I've never heard the term twitchy speed so much in my life as when I hear
Yes.
people describe this guy. Like
Yep.
Gruden clearly loves him, drafting him at 12. And yeah, like you said, it's going to be a burner all day. Somebody who I really am starting to come around on as a sneaky quarterback play this season is Derek Carr, man.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got Josh Jacobs. He's got a lot of wide receivers to play with now. He's probably going to have a very excited, motivated, and aggressive John Gruden. So, the Raiders are going to be a fun team to watch. Now, I don't know how soon Lynn Bowden Jr. is going to be able to make a fantasy impact this season, just because he's a gadget, more conversion type of guy. I don't know how much regular uses he's going to get right off the bat. And Brian Edwards, on the other hand, check out this projection from Brugler. Quote, his athletic skill and physicality as a pass catcher makes him a potential NFL weapon, especially over the middle of the field, end quote. I just expect Gruden to, there's going to be burners on the outside. You need somebody in the middle of the field. Between him and Waller at tight end, good Lord, this offense is all of a sudden stacked and going to be fun to watch.
Yeah. And it's interesting you said Derek Carr because, they did bring in Mr. Tannehill, right? So is that going – no?
No, Tannehill's on the Titans. They brought in Mariota.
God. Okay,
and
sorry.
We just covered that too. He's goofball.
Moving on.
They brought in Marcus Mariota, but like I said, this is the best set of weapons that Derek Carr has had in God knows how long.
That's true.
So I just do not think it's going to be hard for him to keep Marcus Mariota.
Refilling my coffee. Move on. Ignore me.
All right. Yep, sounds great. Moving on to the LA Chargers. No big deal, kind of a big deal, or definitely a big deal that they drafted quarterback from Oregon, Justin Herbert, at 6 overall in the first round.
Yeah. I mean, from a fantasy perspective, not a big deal. For their team, kind of a big deal. I'm not sure I'm a believer that you're going to entrust your franchise with Justin Herbert as a rookie, but more power to you.
I've heard a lot this offseason about how much they love Tyrod Taylor. Unfortunately, he's heard that song and dance time and time again around the NFL before he gets replaced by a rookie. But in this case, I'm not sure when Justin Herbert's going to start. I mean, it might not be at all this season. I definitely don't think it's going to be as of week 1. So
I was going to say, one way or another, we'll see Tyrod this season. It just depends on when it is.
Yeah. So for now, we agree that it's no big deal, and we can move on to the LA Rams.
Hey, real quick though. How do you feel like Justin Herbert impacts that receiving core? Because that's been a receiving core that's been pretty dangerous and does.
I'll just have to see when he gets on the field. I just don't. I expect the impact of those wide receivers to be determined by Tyrod Taylor right now.
Love it.
Eventually when we get to Herbert's era, we'll be able to dive into that a little bit more. But right now, I think it's going to be, I think there's going to be an emphasis on some shorter passes, which is really going to spell good things for Austin Eckler.
Completely
All right,
agree.
so we got the LA Rams next up. Our running back, Todd Gurley, is out. His replacement was drafted 52 overall in the second round, Florida State running back Cam Akers. I think this is definitely a big deal. Jay, what do you think?
Yeah, definitely a big deal. And J.K. Dobbins was still on the board at that time. I think some of us were hoping that J.K. would be that selection, but they went with Cam Akers. he's going to be the man in that offense now. And we've seen what running backs can do there, so very exciting from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah, Brugler compared him to a quote souped up version of Duke Johnson in the NFL. So we've always said you free Duke, use Duke.
Yeah,
and,
right.
If you've got now, I will say the running back room is kind of crowded. You've got Cam Akers, Darrell Henderson, Malcolm Brown, and John Kelly. But what have you done for me lately? And actions speak louder than words.
Yep.
And they invested the most draft capital in Cam Akers. So
Yep.
I think he's got as good of a shot to lead that backfield in carries as any of them.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah, the other thing the Rams did was kind of no big deal in my opinion. Wide receiver Brandon Cooks traded, and they drafted Florida wide receiver Van Jefferson at 57 overall in the second. I think this is no big deal because Brandon Cooks didn't do much last year, and I don't know if Jefferson will earn enough 2020 playing time to even make a year one impact in fantasy.
Give me all that Robert Woods stock.
Oh my God, no kidding, man. Moving on, another team that Miami Dolphins have impressed me since starting the middle of last season. I've been impressed by every single thing that I've seen from the Miami Dolphins up until they traded for Matt Breida, because I was having a Jordan Howard party all day yesterday until they traded for Matt Breida. So yeah, we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's get the obvious one out of the way. In real life, it's a big deal. In fantasy this season, it is not a big deal that they drafted Alabama quarterback Tua Tagovailoa in the first round at 5 overall. Even if he's medically cleared anytime before week 5, I'll be shocked. And if not, let him learn from Fitzmagic for a year. Let Fitzmagic work with a competent coaching staff, a stacked backfield, and some really nice weapons to throw to and see what you guys can get done.
Yes, very impressed by that coaching staff. And, we knew somebody was going to take the shot at Tua. It was the Dolphins. That's probably going to end up being a good pick. I believe clearly the number 2 quarterback in this draft class. Somebody they are hoping is going to lead them into the future after they've missed on a couple of guys here lately. And like you said, no reason to rush him at this point. They've got a solid team. They've built some good pieces. And Fitzmagic can certainly lead them this season until Tua is ready to go. So no reason to rush him. But like you said, from a fantasy perspective, not a huge impact early on at least.
Right. Now, on the other hand, it is definitely a big deal that they brought in Jordan Howard and Matt Breida, because that backfield was just deplorable last season.
Yeah.
They had Kenyon Drake, and then they sent him away, and that wasn't very smart looking.
No.
But, yeah, so, we're big fans of Jordan Howard. There's a lot of metrics, even in the 9 games he played last year, that I absolutely love. I thought for a second that they were going to make him the guy, but Matt Breida's always got nagging injuries, and Jordan Howard's been a lot more durable throughout his career. So if Matt Breida can stay healthy, then I expect Howard and Breida to form a formidable but fantasy frustrating running back by committee.
I almost take it personally at this point. We talked about how Michael Gallup is kind of the forgotten WR2 in that offense, even though he's put up productive numbers as a sophomore. Jordan Howard, for some reason, always produces, and yet nobody gives the guy respect. Not in the fantasy world, not in the football world, and not even on his own teams. I mean, I don't get it for him. I feel for the guy. He's been nothing but a rock-solid, reliable running back in the NFL for years.
Yeah, peek behind the curtain in preparation for this pod. I was texting Jay all day, all kinds of stats about Jordan Howard last year. And just so excited that he might get the chance to be the guy in Miami. And then I had to go take care of some things, come back, look at the draft, and see that they finally trade for Matt Breida. And I was just like, are you kidding me, man?
Well, you know what? I'll tell you what. From a draft perspective, I think that helps Ben, because he's a guy, like we said, nobody really respects. Nobody wants to count on in fantasy football, so he's not going to go early. You'll be able to get him late and stash him on your bench, and when Breida inevitably goes down with an injury, you can plug him right in and be a rock-solid RB1.
No, it's an outstanding point, and we'll definitely fight each other in all of our
We'll go a
overlap
few
leagues.
rounds early in our league, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll both be fighting each other for him. Moving on to the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah.
They traded Stephon Diggs,
Yep.
but they drafted LSU wide receiver Justin
Oh,
Jefferson, 22 overall in the first. It's definitely a big deal. I'm
it
sure you
is.
agree, but I'd like to
Yes.
hear your why before I tell you mine.
I'm going to tell you why, because they've got a 30-year-old receiver who we love in. This is what
Adam
happens.
Thielen.
What happens when we're live? In Adam Thielen, they needed a young receiver who could produce. The reason why I roll my eyes and I'm frustrated is because the Philadelphia Eagles picked right in front of them and passed on him. Minnesota
Yeah.
could not have run to the podium fast enough,
Oh
and
yeah.
I love the pick. In my opinion, he is a day one fantasy relevant and football relevant receiver for any organization he goes to. And,
Yep.
I'm just frustrated that Philly passed on him because he's exactly what they need.
And you know, when you read on when I read up on Justin Jefferson, it sounds to me like he's almost certainly going to have a defined slot role, and thus is going to, like you said, immediately find his way to fantasy relevancy in 2020. And by default, Adam Thielen goes right back to being a sneaky, rock solid wide receiver one. So with Adam Thielen having a down year last year, I'm hoping to get some value out of him this upcoming draft season as well.
Listen,
So yeah, you just table your Philadelphia Eagles. We'll
no,
get to them in a couple.
I was going to say, we've seen what the two receivers in Minnesota can be, even in an offense like you said was what, ranked 23rd, 24th in the league in passing attempts and passing volume last year.
Yep,
And you
24th.
had Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs be borderline both WR1s the last couple seasons. So you see, even with a lower passing volume, what those top two receivers in Minnesota can be, which has to have you excited about Justin Jefferson.
More than anything, I'm excited about Adam Thielen
Well, hey,
this season, and
you're right.
I
Yeah,
really hope people are sleeping on him going into
good.
the draft.
Yeah, me too. All right, let's move on.
Moving on to a team that fantasy wise is all but left for dead. New England Patriots did not do anything this offseason that is a positive big deal, in my opinion. They brought in wide receiver Marquise Lee on a 1-year deal. In the third round, they drafted a pair of tight ends, UCLA tight end Devin Asiasi and Va Tech tight end Dalton Keene, both in the third round. When's the last time a rookie tight end was a tight end one, especially one drafted in the third? And I don't even know who's throwing to him. And the same goes for Marquise Lee, and Marquise Lee can never stay healthy. So outside of like defense and maybe some running backs, I don't know what you're looking for from the Patriots this season.
I would really hope that they make a move in the quarterback room before the start of the season. You know, Bill Belichick is already quoted as saying, when questioned as to why they didn't take a quarterback in this draft, that it wasn't by design. So I would imagine that the guys that they were targeting went before where they wanted to get them. And, you know, from a fantasy perspective, absolutely not a big deal for any of these guys. But what is a big deal is we are really gonna see who has the magic, Belichick or Brady, because Belichick didn't add any weapons to this offense. So we'll see really who the magic man is now as they both go out and try to prove their case.
If Bill can swing some magic on that roster and
Then my
performance-wise
goodness,
this season, then yeah, just give him a second, third, fourth crown
greatest
and just
ever,
walk away.
cement it.
On the other side, man, is Tampa Bay not the team to watch this year? Anyway, we'll get to them in a minute, but that wraps it up for the New England Patriots for right now. Moving on to a very fun team in fantasy football, always, the New Orleans Saints. They definitely a big deal, made a major splash this offseason that I don't think people are talking nearly enough about. They signed wide receiver Emmanuel Manny Sanders, 2 years, $16 million. This is definitely a big deal. Just think of the name Marquise Colston.
Yeah.
That is the last time Drew Brees had a legitimate wide receiver too.
Yep.
I love this move for Manny Sanders, Drew Brees, and Michael Thomas.
I
Manny Sanders is going to be a rock solid wide receiver 2 in 2020. Lock it up.
completely agree. Look, coming off his Achilles tear, nobody really gave him the benefit of the doubt, especially at his age. But he came back and he produced for San Francisco last year and was fantastic. And I think he still has it in him. He still has fuel left in the tank. And I'm with you, man. I think a very appealing WR2 for New Orleans. And like you said, opens it up for everybody else. An added, reliable target for Drew Brees and can take some of the pressure off of Michael Thomas now that they have somebody else to worry about in that receiving core.
Absolutely. The only other fantasy relevant draft pick or transaction that they made is a nice little transaction from a dynasty perspective. But for this purposes of redraft in fantasy this season, it's probably not a big deal that in the third round at 105, they drafted Dayton tight end Adam Trapman. As we said, rookie tight ends aren't usually a thing, and at least for now, it's still the Jared Cook show in New Orleans.
Yeah, and New Orleans, we've been kind of searching for that tight end to step up and be dominant for quite some time. It's not going to be this rookie at least anytime soon. So yeah, we'll wait and see on that. Not a big fantasy impact right now.
Yep. And real quick, New York Giants signed running back Dion Lewis 1 year, $1.5 million. That's definitely no big deal. He'll spell Saquon if and when Saquon allows him to spell Saquon.
Boy, what a snooze fest for this offseason. Jeez.
I mean, you can make this. Feel like the same type of jokes you can make about Chuck Norris, you can make about Saquon. He's not letting any running back touch his workload.
No, not at all.
All right, moving on to the New York Jets. I think I like something sneaky that they did that's not getting a lot of buzz. They signed wide receiver Rashard Perriman to a 1 year, $2 million deal. I think that's kind of a big deal because every time this guy's gotten recent opportunities, both with the Bucs and the Browns, he is absolutely balled out to like a wide receiver 1 level in fantasy. And I expect him to be a sneaky sleeper. He's going to be more consistent than Robbie Anderson, and he could end up being the guy. Last year, the guy in that passing game was Jeremiah Crowder. He is not intended to be the guy in a pass offense. He's intended to be the slot possession type of guy. And Rashard Perriman could very well take over that receiving core. Unlike, everybody's excited about wide receiver Denzel Mims from Baylor that they drafted at 59 overall in the second round. I personally think that's no big deal for 2020 because he's got talent, he's got upside, he's got a lot of speed, but his route running needs work. It sounds a lot like the boom bust wide receiver 39 that just left, Robbie Anderson type, until he can prove otherwise to me.
I would love to disagree with you, Ben, but I think you really nailed this one on the head. Rashad Perriman balled out last year for Tampa. He showed you the kind of pro that he is, and he still has the ability. And like you said, Robbie Anderson's out, and no other receiver on that offense can stay healthy. So, I like the value there. I'd imagine nobody is investing a lot of draft capital there, and he's going to be a nice, sneaky depth play later in drafts.
Absolutely. I hope he's somebody that's totally ignored, and in one of your free flyer type picks at the end, you can just go pluck him nearly for free.
And honestly, probably a tremendous best ball play.
Absolutely, no doubt. We've got to do it, Jay. We've got to do it. We got to move on to your Philadelphia Eagles. I'll say my piece and get out of your way.
Just move on. Just skip it. Just skip it.
From a fantasy perspective, the two things that they did that could impact fantasy are going to be no big deal in 2020. They drafted TCU wide receiver Jalen Reagor at 21 overall in the first, like we said, right in front of LSU wide receiver Justin Jefferson that Jay would have loved to have. In 3 years at TCU, he only went over 1,000 yards receiving once, including 611 yards in 12 games last season. And then, if that's not enough, in the second round, wait, there's more. 53 overall, they draft Oklahoma quarterback Jalen Hurts. They compared their plan for him to what's the quarterback's name in New Orleans, the backup quarterback.
Oh
my gosh,
I know.
It escapes me.
Listen,
I'm gonna look this up. So you go ahead and commiserate. I'm just gonna look that up because that's gonna bother me.
Taysom Hill.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry about that, guys. They stay talking about how they want to use him like Taysom Hill, and Taysom Hill plays special teams. Taysom Hill's fast. Taysom Hill is going to go tackle people, and he can throw and run. So I don't really see how they're going to get Taysom Hill type value out of this guy. And I think the dirty little secret is that we all have. I'm sure in Philadelphia, everybody's a little hesitant to depend on the durability of Carson Wentz. And I think that last year when they needed a good backup the most, they saw they didn't have one. And I think with with an ouchie quarterback, they want a number two that they can really rely on when they need to. And if he plays well enough to to dethrone Carson Wentz, I'm sure they won't have a problem with that either.
Thank you. That is the reason why they did what they did. My big issue is, did they need to do that in the second round? There are other needs on a team that should be contending for championships with the roster that they have, but that roster does have holes, and they didn't do anything to really address them with top end talent. Now I'm going to get fired up. You have a need. Everybody in this world knows that they have a need for a receiver, okay? They had nobody at the end of last season. They had a converted running back as their lead receiver. And you have Justin Jefferson, a guy who can step in and be impactful, not only from fantasy, but in actual football. And they pass on that guy and allow Minnesota to go in and make a great pick. And they take a guy who they think can be flashy. I don't know if they're trying to go get their next Deshaun Jackson or Nelson Aguilar, but that's not what you need to build that receiving core. You need your number one first. You can go get your little flashy guy later. You don't waste a number one pick on that. And then in the second round, they do nothing to address their linebacking core. That defense is what has held them back. Now, I admit that defense has been just obliterated by injury, and it's getting healthier, so that's good. But there are still holes, and they could have addressed it with quality, and they didn't. Instead, they go pick a backup quarterback who is not going to get the field, who's not going to see the field unless their starter gets hurt. And you're wasting a second-round pick on that? What? What are we doing?
I wanted to get you going. I didn't want to get you going that bad. I'm sorry.
What are we doing?
But I got to be honest, another little peek behind the curtain. Everybody know I'm a big Browns fan. Jay's a big Eagles fan. And so it's been a really fun draft season this year when the Browns just get lauded and praised for every draft move they make. And the Eagles are just one of the clowns of the draft this year. And Jay's like texting me demanding Andrew Berry's return to Philly. And it's just, with all the suffering and pain that Cleveland's faced over the years, I'm enjoying it a little bit. I can't lie. All right, you good? You got that out of your system?
Move on.
Hey, you know what? Let that recent Super Bowl keep you warm.
It does. It does.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Moving on, we got the Pittsburgh Steelers, man. I've only got two. I think they're both a sneaky big deal. They signed tight end Eric Ebron, 2 years, $12 million. The Steelers love to target tight ends, and if he's healthy, remember that this guy is still just 27 years old and only 2 years removed from that beast season in Indianapolis. His only main competition on that roster is ouchie Vance McDonald. Thus, it's his role to lose, and I see legit tight end one upside all over the place with him this season.
Yeah, man. Sorry for Vance, but that is a very interesting play. Like you said, they love to target the tight end. Eric Ebron certainly has that ability, and very sneaky tight end play late in drafts, which is where you should be taking tight ends.
Yeah, no kidding. And then they turned around and gave Big Ben another weapon on the outside. At 49 overall in the second, they drafted Notre Dame wide receiver Chase Claypool.
Yeah.
He is a 238-pound beast that runs a 4.42 40, and he's on a team with wide receiver needs and Big Ben's cannon. He could develop into a fantasy-relevant role as the season unfolds for sure.
I'll tell you what, he is going to be exciting to watch in the red zone. That guy can go up and get the ball. His point of attack is fantastic and really should be a nice weapon in the red zone with Big Ben, even if he doesn't have the type of volume or consistency that we like to see initially being a rookie.
Right. All right, moving on to San Francisco. The 49ers signed wide receiver Travis Benjamin this offseason, 1 year, $1 million. No big deal. Plain and simple, they need a wide receiver or two to step it up this year. Will it be T. Benj from the slot? I don't know, maybe, but I'm definitely not banking on that. I think there's much better chance that Arizona State wide receiver Brandon Ayuk, drafted 25th overall in the first round, has a much better chance to be kind of a big deal this year because Dane Brugler compared him to Manny Sanders, which is good enough for me, but he also averaged over 18 yards per reception at Arizona State in 2019. So he's got big play written all over him. And with that first round equity invested in him, his role is all but guaranteed on that offense.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot to invest in a guy. Somebody going in the first round, is going to get an opportunity, so that's exciting. From a fantasy football perspective, am I going to invest a lot of draft capital in him? No, probably not initially. I mean, I like Deebo Samuel, and I like Kendrick Bourne. I think those guys are flashy, and maybe this little weapon kind of helps open those guys up a little bit more. Though they're more of a known quantity, and at this point for a receiver, I'd probably invest a little bit more draft capital in those guys, but I'm excited to see what he can do.
Absolutely. And, this time of year, that's all we can ask for.
Yep.
So moving on to the Seattle Seahawks, a team that's really fun to watch. They signed a podcast favorite this offseason, tight end Greg Olsen, 1 year, $7 million. In my opinion, take my fandom out of it, this is definitely a big deal. I think Greg Olsen demonstrated to all of us that he still has it last year, and Seattle tight ends always ball out with Russell Wilson at the helm. So I'm looking for one last solid season from our guy, Greg Olsen. I hope he is undervalued in the draft. I hope he's around in late rounds, and he is somebody that I like in the double-digit rounds and beyond as much as any tight end this.
All right, now see, I get to disagree with you. I don't think this is a big deal. I mean, Greg Olsen, great tight end. Hall of Famer, probably. But while he was impactful when he was healthy last season, I just think he's shown over the last few seasons that his health is a major concern. His durability is a major concern. Seattle does love their tight ends. They can make the completely irrelevant guy a relevant tight end in fantasy. So the upside is there for Greg Olsen. I just don't know if I can rely on him health-wise now in drafts.
And that's all part of the price, man.
I totally agree. You're right.
That's
his
right. Risk. You're
right.
You're 1,000% that is his risk. But two things. One, when he was healthy, he showed that he still had it last year.
You're right.
Number two, I think it's a lot easier for a guy at this stage in his career to fight through some nagging injuries and work that much harder in the rehab process when he's on a team that is a legit Super Bowl contender versus a team that has clearly been floundering, if not outright rebuilding for years.
Yep.
Now. Yeah. So the only other thing they did from a fantasy relevant perspective is that they signed wide receiver Philip Dorsett to a 1 year, $1 million deal in the offseason. That's no big deal. This is the Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf show. I don't see him making too much of a fantasy dent this year.
Nah. I mean, he'll have some games where he does all right, but no, you're right. This is.
We're going to alphabetically skip this team. We've got 3 teams left. We're saving the best for last in Tampa Bay. Period.
Okay. All
right. Moving on to the Tennessee Titans. They released tight end Delaney Walker. I think this is kind of a big deal because Jonnu Smith is going to be a mid to back end tight end one this year, in my opinion, as a result.
I'm going to say somewhere between kind of a big deal and not a big deal. Look, Jonnu's had his opportunities. He'll be a fine tight end. I just don't know if he's somebody that I really want to trust in fantasy.
Once again, I'm saying this with the thought that he's going to be like a nearly free pick.
Well, yeah.
Within that context, sure. I'm definitely not subscribing to any sort of single-digit round pick with him. So
right.
Just understand that context. But another thing that they did that may kind of be a big deal for Derrick Henry is that in the third round, 93 overall, they drafted Appalachian State running back Darrington Evans. And I mean, he is a fast, efficient running back who may vulture some touches from DH. who Evans may replace, quite honestly, in 2021.
Yeah, they jettisoned Dion Lewis, so I would imagine that the Rook is going to step into that role. And we saw that role really didn't have a huge fantasy impact the last couple seasons because DH has just been so impactful. So I don't know, man. Until I see it, I'm going to roll with DH until I see that really they're going to try to start balancing out his workload.
Yeah, when you're talking about Derrick Henry this season and you're comparing him to all the other high-end running backs, when you get to that point of the list, you start to nitpick a little bit. And if they, I don't quite see this guy as a no-name non-contributor. If they would have drafted somebody like that, that would have helped tip my hand towards that much more high-end confidence in Derrick Henry.
Right.
It gives me just a little bit of pause now that they've invested that draft equity, kind of like A-Raj, on somebody who could eventually replace him.
Right.
So, that's just my thought. Obviously, we've got a lot of time, a lot of more information for us to digest before we make our draft picks and final recommendations. But we've got 2 teams left in what is definitely the longest episode in fantasy Foresight history. But here we are. Washington Redskins signed running back Peyton Barber, 2 years, $3 million. I actually think this is kind of a big deal. This seems boring, but between him, AP, and Darius Geis, I expect one to emerge as the guy in Ron Rivera's offense. If that happens, then you're likely looking at a decent running back too, a la Jonathan Stewart pre-CMC.
Yeah, it's kind of a big deal. Which guy's going to stay healthy? Whoever is the guy, yes, will be fantasy relevant, sure. It's just like you said, it's going to be difficult to be able to predict who that's going to be on a weekly basis. But whoever it is will be coveted, in waivers or whoever emerges, sure.
Right.
But like you said, not the most exciting.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we were not ending this podcast with this team. We're ending it with Tampa Bay.
Oh boy.
So the Redskins signed and drafted a wide receiver this offseason. They signed wide receiver Cody Latimer for 1 year for $1 million. That's no big deal, but he did get my attention a little bit in New York last season, going over 100 yards receiving 2 times, including 181 yards in week 9.
Well, hey, we did see Brashad Perriman really ball out with Mike Evans. And, oh my God, here we go. Who's the number 2?
Who are you talking about? In Tampa Bay? We're in Washington still.
Oh, we are? Oh, yeah. I thought we were moving on. We're still talking about
No. Oh. We've got to clean up the last 2 things in Washington.
God.
Then we're moving on to Tampa Bay. Sorry
let's move on.
Communicate that clearly.
Yeah, sorry.
Here's the thing about the Washington Redskins receivers. I have no clue who will quarterback this team because they have Haskins, Kyle Allen, and Alex Smith on the roster.
Yeah.
And none of them say explosive passing to me at this point. And then wide receiver Antonio Gibson, he was drafted 66 overall in the 3rd round from Memphis. He played running back in college, and he's a dynamic pass catcher, change of pace kind of guy.
Yeah.
He may be their primary slot target, which is the only reason I think he could equate to fantasy value this season, because if you're in a dink and dunk short pass offense, then there could be some value with the slot.
Yeah, love him there. Love him in that position too. You're right.
All right. So you've lasted on this marathon.
Thank goodness. Let's go.
And we are going to pay off right now. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are the team of the offseason, period. It's not even debatable. They signed Tom Brady TB12 for 2 years at $50 million. That's definitely a big deal. And plain and simple, I think fantasy relevant, dominant Tom Brady is back.
I mean, he's certainly motivated, right? I mean, he wants to go out there and prove that it was him and not Belichick. He's got the best weapons he's ever had in his career.
And it's not close.
No.
He's had some great weapons, but it did not like this.
And I'll tell you what, a lot of people may doubt Tom Brady that he has it left in his tank, and last season I may have been one of those guys, whether or not he still had the arm to throw that deep ball and pinpoint it with accuracy. But here's the argument that I'm going to say in favor of Tom Brady, and that's Peyton Manning. We saw Peyton go to Denver, and the year before his arm fell off, he threw for over 50 touchdowns with weapons at his disposal. And Tom Brady has not fallen off that much. I think I'm not going to say he's going to sit here and throw 50 touchdowns, but The ability is there, and the capability to have a resurgence in fantasy is there. And I'm excited to see what Tom Brady is going to do in this Bruce Arians offense.
Yeah, because he was entering an already stacked offense. And then after Tom Brady came to town,
Yeah.
all they did was add Rob Gronkowski at the tight end position and draft a solid running back from Vanderbilt, running back Keyshawn Vaughn. It's
Yeah.
definitely a big deal that they traded for Gronk. I'm not sure about his overall volume or his overall fantasy finish, but he's as interesting of a fantasy tight end prospect as any this season. I mean, it's Gronk. Like, I'm not going to be shocked if he looks exactly like Gronk of old whatsoever. I mean, I'm not saying that's the most likely occurrence, but if it happens, especially early on when Tom Brady is looking for familiarity and people that he's used to in that offense, Gronk could feast.
Dude, I am shocked that they did not give up Cameron Braid or OJ Howard in that deal or in another deal. The fact that they are keeping all three, one, maybe tells you a little bit about what they think reliability-wise from Gronk. Maybe there's some question marks there, but I think Gronk's fresh, and I think he's motivated to get away from Bill Belichick, and he's probably going to enjoy football a little bit more down in Tampa. Maybe stay away from some of the parties down in Florida, but we'll see what Gronk is. And I mean, boy, what the litany of weapons there in Tampa, and not to mention their rookie running back they drafted, Vaughn, that you said, that's a running back room that can easily be taken over. So it's all exciting there, man. It is all exciting from a fantasy perspective. That could be a sneaky running back play.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Sleeper alert.
Yeah. Stash that guy on your bench, and we'll see what happens.
James White 2.0 role.
What, Rojo's going to hold him off?
Keyshawn is going to be James White 2.0. If you listen to this podcast, you know how much we love James White.
Yeah.
And so we don't make that comparison lightly. If Rojo does not stay at the top of his game, not only will he have his workload eaten into, he might have it taken over from him entirely.
And
so again, I really hope that Rojo is still the preferred back in fantasy, and that he's some double-digit round guy that you can just throw a late dart throw at. And just sit back and watch what happens, because especially in PPR formats, this guy could shock a lot of people this year.
And there's no ridiculous Bill Belichick play calling down there in Tampa where you can have James White continually produce and yet not give him the rock. So let's go. Let's go.
I mean, I'm so glad that we ended with that guy on this team in what has been a really fun return episode.
How about this?
Foresight, the podcast. I mean, I hope that the live version is still able to be listened to without too many nails on the chalkboard compared to the edited version. But we certainly had a lot of fun with it. We're thrilled to be back. And then next week, we're going to be back with our guy Steve at Foresight Encyclopedia, and we're going to get into the same consistent or the repeat studies that we looked at last year at quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. So the three of us will be back with you later this week to discuss all that. Can't wait.